Let's put it up there.
Thank you for the audience. Okay, so let's blow through this because a lot of this is just good pictures that we can talk about. So these are observations of 10 years of repairing wet buildings.
Go ahead. So you tell me where you want me to go.
Okay, click. Okay, so as we were talking about before, masonry materials have changed. We use a lot of engineered materials, split face block, rock face CMU, jumbo block, half heights. That's a slang. That's a street slang that I know of as far as colored cinder block. They also call it architectural brick. Next, please. This is an example of Renaissance stone, which is a surname for engineered cinder block that looks like limestone. Next.
Hey, Bob, you could give a thumbs up and then we'll flip the slide. So you don't have to say next.
Excellent. Thank you. So the old school masons are given this thing called flashing, but yet they feel like they have to have a bond between the layers. The bond actually keeps the water in, and as you can see in that picture of vinyl flashing, the water goes around the mortar joint and back down into the wall. Okay, low slope roofing methods. You got to keep the building dry. Well, how do we do it? The easiest way to do it is wrap the top of the wall, and there's no ventilation in that system. Okay. Building connections. We're still putting lumber into masonry buildings. Most of the jobs that we've seen, and when I say 99%, I've never seen a building that didn't have the wood sitting in the masonry.
So Bob, keeping with that screen,
Mm-hmm.
I know that people are scared by the visual,
Right.
but can you take it the step and say why this is happening not all this needs the deep dive today because you did it last time, but this one in particular I think does.
Okay. So this is what I would consider a traditional assembly. Wood sitting in the masonry. Now we have punk lumber sitting in a highly porous substrate. In this case, there's no protection at the ends of the trusses for water to wick up through the end grain of the wood. And the building code also mandates to grout all the block solid to the lumber. So the building code is not updated to how water transfers through. And then water gets in and rots out the galvanized plates that connect all of the trusses together. So if we're standing inside of that masonry block, the top of the truss looks like this. That's correct.
This is the end grain that Bob's talking about. And then that butts into the inside of the masonry. So what each of these are straws. There are millions of straws. Absolutely. So if you put a little bit of moisture here, where does it go? Like a raceway through capillary action, it goes all through. And then it got stopped on those areas that we see the timber in the photo being black. Because that moisture was trapped there, this is a sponge that can't breathe and continues to get saturated in a cold, dark, hot, dark, cold, dark, hot, dark place. So it's growing mushrooms.
Right. Not to mention, Mark, that water goes down through parapets that don't have any protection, and then it hits the truss, and the truss interrupts the flow of water that's through the wall, and then carries in. So when you see leaks in a building, they'll be at a can light that's near a wall, or the corner of the drywall looks damaged. It's because it's interrupting the flow. Now, another fact that maybe other people outside don't realize is that we're also told to put a vapor barrier over the insulation, right? Now, the vapor barrier also traps the water, and many people don't even know that water is flowing through the walls. So many jobs, the prevalence of particle board trim.
Okay. You mean garbage?
Like garbage. Well, imagine that garbage never being affected, so nobody knows what's going on. But I hear in fact, I heard a story. I've got a meeting later on today where the lady reports water squirting through her outlets. Okay.
Success.
That's my next.
What an
point.
invention, right? Not only can you plug in a light, but you can get a drink. What an
You can get a
amazing
drink.
invention.
And electrocuted.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
That's what I call shock therapy, right?
I've got a friend who told me he moved out of his split face block building 10 years ago because his pictures were getting blown off the walls. I'm so sorry. I hate to laugh like that, but it's
It's a squirt gun, right? There's a little
Yeah.
pinhole where the nail was, and now it shot the picture off the wall. I'm sorry, you can't recreate that in a Disney movie.
No, you
That's
can't.
awesome. I'm laughing at that one. Sorry for the folks that have water squirting out of your walls, but holy cannoli.
This is not dramatic, guys. I don't want to try to paint a dramatic picture, that so much so that people don't believe it. Okay. The biggest concern, the reason why we're here, is because we are at a precipice of, it's like the collapse of the back porches in Chicago. Okay, that I see rotten trusses on a daily basis. Now we're at a ripe 20-year mark when this type of construction plus TGIs, any open web trusses with particle board or OSB as their component, these things are failing. And we want to get the word out that there needs to be some remediation and awareness of this product, of this process, as quickly as possible, because the next step is going to be loss of life. So let's move on with the next slides, please.
It's an impactful statement.
Thank you. Zero protection from moisture in the masonry. Okay. Yep, OSB has zero tolerance for water. TGIs, trim joists, and so on. Okay. Well, here's how we fix the wet buildings.
Yes.
Well, we have to jumpstart it by venting the walls and getting them dry. Next one. Maximize drying. And what we do is we always install a linear passive ventilation system. That way you're covering every square inch at the top of the parapet wall. The concept is, imagine water vapor rising from the entire building as though there's no protection on top of it. So the building becomes a linear chimney. Well, and then we do reinforce our trusses. Sometimes we have to replace trusses, but we often try to rebuild them in place to create value. And then we protect them by properly prepping and applying high quality masonry sealants. Now, okay, I'd like to stop for a second. The next slides, we're going to blow through a bunch of them because I want to jump into sealing, because the key to fixing these buildings is you have to minimize bulk water. You have to create ventilation and then protect it from any kind of water intrusion and venting at the parapets. Now, the roof system is a huge source of condensation. If you ever pull back the roof where it's turned up against the inside of a parapet wall on a warm morning, after you've had, let's say, 70-degree morning from a 50-degree evening, it will look like a rainforest.
Yep.
So This is often why. In fact, I saw one on a building 2 days ago. It looked like a waterbed behind the roof membrane at the cant strip. Now, this is a 2-year-old building, fancy 20-unit building. All these units go for $1 million a piece. It had water beds in all of the cant strips. So I didn't get a video of it, but I took my pocket knife and we punctured a few of them. Okay, next one. Okay, here's a wind simulation study that we had done. This shows that when the wind hits the side of the parapet wall, the other side of that is negative pressure. The negative pressure is what we play off of to be able to create the suction. And the numbers on that are roughly, when the wind blows through our device, it creates a negative pressure of about 7.2 CFM. Chicago has an average wind speed of 18 miles per hour. So those are the numbers that support why we need to suck water vapor out of buildings. So how we do it.
There's people like Scout Fireman in the chat right now that are sitting there like, okay, the wind speed in Chicago is 18 and the pressure up, like, it's awesome, Bob. Way to go. I love that one.
Thank you. Next one. Okay.
Yeah.
On the left is flashing, which is a high quality contemporary flashing. but that's the frost in the winter. The other one is dripping wet. Even with a 3-inch cavity, it is still having massive condensation. Next.
Wow.
Yet another wet flashing job. Next. This is a video. This is important to see. If Dave, if you could run that, please. That's the water under the flashing.
Wow.
And the flashing literally just peeled away in your hands?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was the average unpeeled or unglued mason's flashing, the vinyl stuff that everybody used for so many years, because they didn't know about how to ventilate from underneath it.
So there's not a bond point. It's literally resting on what's left of the dried mortar mix, right?
That's correct.
And then the bricks act like glasses and just hold all that moisture that just keeps dropping in there night after night, morning after morning.
Right. Now, this is an example of how the industry has changed its manufacturing processes, right? So we get super hard, we got pottery. The pottery is bonded together with, just as hard type N mortar, which is very common. So they're vessels that hold moisture. The reason why they didn't have issues on the old buildings is because the clay brick is very soft and absorbs moisture. The pure lime mortar without Portland cement is the poultice that sucks the water out and exhausts that moisture to the atmosphere. So this is why, you'd say, oh, old is better than new or whatever. Well, no, it's just a different mechanism altogether. So
yeah.
Next slide.
That's a great distinction, Bob. You're not pointing fingers. You're saying this is how this behaves because of how it was made, and this is how it's behaving today because we make it differently.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to know what material you're using. Otherwise, you don't know the mortar mix and the protection that's going to be needed for it, because there might be repeating procedures now that this is sideways, correct?
Correct. Now, here's in the next slide. This is we pulled off the capstone. You can see it was the same application. At first I thought, boy, these masons are really cheap. They cut the flashing short of the edge.
Yeah.
No, it's so common. I've seen this hundreds of times. It's cut short because they look for a mortar bond, gluing it together, where you don't need a mortar bond. A lot of the stuff, most of Chicago stays together on sheer gravity. So we grind the top of the...
Say that again, Bob. Say that one more time.
Stays together.
Chicago stays together on sheer gravity. Okay. I thought I was scared last week. Now I'm actually frightened.
Well, when I would do any structural work on an old brick foundation, you have to be careful, because if you lift those joists off the foundation wall, you can easily have a collapse because of the hydrostatic pressure behind it. It's the force that's holding it together. It's just... okay.
That's like when you're working on the project and the guy next to you says, don't do that. Don't do that. And you literally freeze, right? Because he's seeing something moving, like you just mentioned, and you didn't expect it. It's a real terror.
Right. So in this slide, we're showing that there's a very common fabric that we found that has a high perm rating, but yet it'll hold the surface tension of water. Okay. As much as Diane hates me to say this, I've seen it. I've seen it on the bottom of a box spring. So
the bottom of what?
Well, it's a commonly used textile that allows breathability but resists moisture. So when we found this, we were doing full metal copings, taking the copings off of buildings and then do a full metal coping that had an airspace. But I wanted to save the limestone. So in order to save the limestone, we realized that a horizontal wind-driven rain coming in, what happens is that the water then has the ability to sit on the fabric while it's blowing through the corrugated plastic. Now we can save the limestone on a building because of this fabric. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's an installation of our capstone VRS. We put down the fabric. We glue, not fasten. We glue with polyurethane sealants our flashing onto the top of the fabric, and then we roll out a self-adhered flashing membrane. Then in the next picture, you'll see that we we glue the stones on top of that flashing with polyurethane sealant. Next. Okay, let's go through this quickly, Dave. The arrows indicate the wind speed, the wind direction. Now, when we get down to the top of the panel on the right-hand side, I want to talk about that for 1 second.
You want me to go next?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. One more. Stop right there. That's the sweet spot, okay? The gap at the vent panel of the roof termination, right there. That is where all the pressure, and that's where all the magic happens. That's where we suck out all the water vapor. It's a clear path from the roof system. Now, I've been asked some really interesting questions about what about fire? Am I opening up the building to have a chimney effect, to have a fire hazard? And we have 5/8 drywall, right? We have a 1 hour fire rating. So what we're doing is we're not doing anything different than what a standard roofing vent product does, except we're addressing the condensation at the source. If you have a roof vent, you often see them in the middle of a roof system. Okay. Well, that doesn't address the condensation source. So we are addressing the source.
Yeah, you're air sealed already, right? And so this layer is. So people bring up fire. I mean, you bring up fire because you think of the air and voids, but you bring up these points because the amount of water in there is turning the building to mush before our very eyes. And I love this arrow pattern taking us up, over, down, and out. And then that moisture is at that point is water. That water runs back on your roofing membrane, and that roofing membrane takes it to where it needs to go.
Right. There's also a condensation event that's going to happen through the seasons. So where the arrow is pointing down onto the roof membrane, I've seen that when heat does get escaped past the insulation, you don't want to retain that heat because that's turning into condensation. It'll condense along the backside of the metal profiling because the way the metal is bent, that we rely on the surface tension of the moisture on the metal, and then it runs to the exterior. It never comes back in. In fact, there's never enough moisture to accumulate ever in this setup. And I've had that question for years, and I've taken this apart, and I've never seen any accumulation of water vapor. So that's why I want to get on to another topic here soon before we run out of time. Let's blow through the next slides here, please.
I got a question on this real quick, Bob. Sure. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you need to have a constant flow of air running between the cap and the wall assembly below to keep that moisture from building up. Is that accurate in saying that?
It's not constant that's needed, but you need, I can't tell you a measured amount, but just the fact that we have water vapor is always lighter than air, is always escaping, and there is always some air movement in our environment. You'll never have any accumulation.
Perfect. All right. Next slide.
Yep. Okay, here's with the metal coping, same condition. Next slide. Okay, that's a picture of the vent panel. Next, please. This is an application. This is important. Old buildings with clay copings, we take off the mortar, we put on the fabric, we use the plastic as a tent. So now keep in mind that there's only about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch gap, maybe, in this assembly. So this was an experiment. We had one building that was repointed with type N mortar and with closed cell foam on the interior. The building filled up with moisture. The air conditioning stopped working. So we vented the top. The building, because it's so porous internally with the pure lime mortar, it sucked all the water vapor out of the structure. The air conditioning turned on in about a month.
Wow.
Okay.
It's pretty remarkable. Those clay tiles are so popular. I don't know if that's something you experience out in Pittsburgh or Connecticut, Dave.
Connecticut for sure.
Those capstones are everywhere, and so many times they're actually blown through. And I think it's remarkable because it's not like they were hit by a bird, right? This thing's literally just sitting in thin air and it shatters.
Wow.
So if you could go down to the next few slides where we start doing, this is important. I'm sorry. when we vent the top of a parapet wall, this commonly happens. We get a rush of water at the roof level. I can't explain it, but it's happened more than once. These pictures were taken by our clients, wondering what's going on. The one on the left is one of our early adopters. It was soaking. It was a sheet of water on an August evening. This other split face block building, there was another rush of water, and it was just. You notice that there's no water standing below the roof level. Okay, so that's about the retention of moisture in these buildings. Okay,
that's a massive amount. You're visually changing the view of the block as that water progresses, and then it moves fast through the top, and once it gets there, then that's the slower release back out. Beautiful, marvelous.
Okay, so why don't you? Okay, this is we're venting down to the through wall flashing. That's the next layer that we can't get past. I have to figure out how to melt the vinyl flashing in these buildings, but that's another story. Let's go down to where we support the trusses with some metal brackets, please.
More.
Here we talk about the concept of an interior rain screen. It's simulating not having any insulation in the structure. So I've been asked how about any bulk water accumulating at the bottom of the building? Well, chances are it's not going to happen. I've never seen it happen. If the top is dry, the bottom is always wicking moisture up to the top. So if there is a bulk water intrusion, it will get sucked up to where the wet always goes to dry. It's a really important concept to trust, and it always does. Okay, next, please. Okay, just a close-up. Here's our venting system.
Look at that.
Rigid plastic behind fiberglass skin polyiso. In this condition, we do not need a termination bar because it's fully adhered. Next, please. Next. This is very important. So we use traditional techniques of bending our sheet metal. This way, the cheap piece of metal that we have our hand on is serviceable so that when the next guy comes along, he can do the roof without taking apart the capstone flashing.
Oh, brilliant.
Serviceability is so important to me. Next. Rotten trusses. Next. Bad plywood.
What does that tell you?
Okay, here we go, guys. This is how we create an environment so that we can do these repairs from the top down. I love it. This was a tough experiment because the first one I built was out of white PVC piping. Within 8 hours, the thing had blown over and crushed. And I stood there in the 40-degree wind knowing that it was a good idea. So we tore it apart, threw it away, and we made a rafter system out of aluminum. So we're able to build a windproof tent. We've been in winds up to 60 miles an hour, snowstorms, heavy rains, and it's 10 mil boat shrink wrap. We put an exhaust fan in there. So let's start going through more of these slides, please. Yep. Okay. This roof system has open cell foam. You wouldn't know that there was so much water until you stepped on it, the debris that was on the floor below. But the fan inadvertently dried out the building, but it creates negative pressure, so it sucks the shrink wrap and controls it so we don't have issues with wind uplift. Next, please. Another example. Next. This is a tent I built for another contractor. He removed all the trusses, and I was standing in the third floor looking through the sky. Next, please. Yep. Air conditioners.
This is remarkable, right? You're standing on the top floor. The air conditioners are inside the temporary tented envelope. And now you have an ability for that masonry to dry out and then be reinforced where needed. And when the new joints go in, they will then be wrapped so that this is not a reoccurring problem. But imagine if you didn't have the tent above you, how would you be working on that area? The drywall, that entire room would be destroyed. absolutely destroyed.
So you go figure the cost of a tent is 2.5 days for 4 men to put it together. My crew. Now we're protecting homes that are worth $1 million plus. Okay, so if we have any rain event, they're done. They can't do the repairs, but we need the roof open for at least 2 to 3 months at a time to do these repairs. Next, please. Next. This is a different style of tent I developed so that we could work on buildings wider than 20 feet. This was removable, and I could close it up every night. We never had a water issue. That roof was open for 3.5 months, doing truss repairs around the perimeter.
Dave, think of the time savings to have this tented. Otherwise, what the roofer would do is you take on, I don't know, let's say 20 square feet, right? Uncap 20 square feet, work on it, cover it back up, and come back the next day. This allows you to progressively get the work done while protecting everything else. You see, this roof is behaving everywhere the way it's supposed to, while the problem areas are addressed. That's a tremendous safety and time saving. Real safe.
Yeah. The other thing was it took us to repair each of these trusses. In this case, it was about 2 trusses per day per man, because there was also another flaw. We found out that the entire truss system was never tied back into the structure, so we also had to modify the support structure at the same time. So you open things up, you never know when to expect. So we'll go through the next few slides, please. Here's a modified tent we used to rebuild another roof system.
Just a small, tiny house there.
Yeah.
Just a small, tiny house.
Okay, next, please. Okay, so insulation always traps moisture. We don't get paid to say this, but I love Rockwool. It's a vapor open, does a great job. Next, please. Open cell foam. This is a video. If you could hit this, it is important to see this.
Yep.
Oh, it's disgusting.
It's a sponge.
It's a sponge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has its place. Open cell foam has its place. Closed cell foam has its place, but we need a space so that we can manage the water vapor and that accumulates behind it. It's held back. So I've heard stories before, but you try to seal up these walls, and if there's a hole, you get a leak through that one hole. Well, the reason why there's a leak is because it's accumulating, and now there's hydrostatic pressure in a wall that should have never seen hydrostatic pressure. So if you vent it, then you would never have that pressure behind your sealants. Next, please. Next. 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 That was repaired 4 years prior to me opening it up. Next, please. Okay, here's how we support the brackets. We block out the trusses. We put structural grade 3/4 plywood on both sides with number 12 hand-driven nails, and then metal brackets that we fabricate. We bolt it with the Hilti epoxy system into the block and into the sides of the trusses. Next, please.
Now, Bob, this picture here, the other interesting part is from the masonry perimeter, it looks like only about 3 to 4 feet of the insulation needed to be removed. Is that about where the moisture stopped on its pathway in?
It's very common that only the first couple of feet are compromised on these buildings because they've got such a dense insulation. Even with all different forms, you almost never get water building up on the interior of these buildings unless there's a source like a bathroom exhaust fan.
So, for instance, just to give perspective on space, it's about 14.5 inches wide. It's about 14, 16, 18 inches high.
Correct.
And it's 2 to 3, upwards of 3.5 feet at a distance, a width, if you will, from the block.
Correct.
That's a lot of cubic space of
Yeah.
water. Like I wonder what that equates to on a saturation period of gallons. There's a number there. There's an actual, it could be 0.75 gallon. I don't know, but that's a number in that cubic area, Bob, that's calculable.
Yeah. You know what? We're up to about 80 to 85 buildings now in Chicago in the past 7 years. And so, I didn't want to really go public about WickRight unless I had about 100 under my belt. But I think we've seen enough repeat behavior now that there are things that we can count on.
It's not just a belt. I mean, it's suspenders and waders. It's everything. It's the whole belt and suspenders and waders approach. Love it.
Yeah. I think just the value, Bob, in the lessons learned on how to tent an entire building is in and by itself remarkable, right? When you think about how you learn how to control that air pressure and the ballooning effect of the wind and all of those things, just that alone, to be able to perform the work in an efficient manner, which is going to save the client or the building owner a ton of money versus having to peel it away like an onion piece by piece and patch it back up. I mean, if I learned anything on this, I'm calling you just to tent my building and then we'll get into the rest of it. We do have a hard stop here in about 5 minutes, so just wanted to give a heads up.
Okay. All right, let's start clicking through these guys. Okay, more installation photos. Next, please. I use a longer bracket these days. I just like more the ability to get more fasteners into the sides of these trusses. Next, please. Okay, this is important. We separate the insulation from the CMU, just so you can understand that how little airspace you need. In every single case, when we do this, we are venting down to the floor below every single time. Water vapor goes around the through-wall flashing and up through our, we call it the roof VRS on the inside of the parapet wall, which has not been installed here yet. Next, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that job in a partial completion state. We, in addition to where it's more of a whiter color around the perimeter, we use our roof VRS, in this case, flat, because I didn't know how much ventilation I really needed, but it was a safety measure. Next,
so this is a polyiso, Bob, pre-pitch?
Yes, pre-pitch polyiso every single time.
So Dave, he's adding, the R value to the top, and it's pitched for bulk water flow, working around all the penetrations that you see that exist, and then reestablishing a spot for the new membrane.
Right, exactly.
Under a tent.
Next
on top of a building. It's not like a tent in the forest.
Okay. Same job, further along. Next, please. Okay, this is what they look like. They're pretty unsuspecting. Next, please. Oh, well, that's to show that our buildings smell like wet dogs before we start. Another job we have coming up, actually, it smells pretty bad. Next, please. That's the picture, the outside picture of the other inside picture of the inside work that we were doing under the tent. Next. That's just a picture of efflorescence. I won't go into the details of how the water is flowing through that structure right now.
Well, if I learned anything, it's probably coming up versus down. It's wicking.
You know what the problem is, that those sills were recessed and then diverting water into the vertical columns, and in every case, that's why the water is accumulated on those pilasters in the middle of the windows.
Well.
Okay. We're in climate zone 5. That's all that's planned. Next, please. Okay, let's go to the next one as well. After this. This building, the cracking is starting at the through-wall flashing. the ceiling, the top of the ceiling, the first floor, the building is accumulating water within the structure. This one has dark elastomeric paint, foam on the interior. It creates such a aggressive condensation climate that the wall is cracking from where the water is sitting on the flashing, going upward. And that crack is about 6 to 7 feet long. And that's a 2.5-year-old structure as it is today. Next.
And it's our cornerstone, right? It's necessary structure for that whole thing. And it's how old did you say?
About 2.5 years.
2.5 years, Dave.
So outside, the moisture measurements from the hygrometer is 88% moisture. On the interior, on the drywall, it was measuring 9.7. So that's how much the foam hides.
Wow.
Next, please.
Oops, sorry.
This building is a very similar structure, elastomeric with foam on the inside. This is 10 degrees below zero. It's showing frost where the vertical reinforcement of the grout and rebar is placed in cinder block buildings. Next, please. Next. Okay, please run this, and then we could probably call it a day. This is called a Rylam tube test. This is how we see how porous masonry is. So just soak this one up, so to speak. Imagine a rain on that structure. This is a very typical unsealed building.
Wow.
I mean, it's like the wall just did a college beer bong.
A college beer bong.
Right? There you go. 12 ounces of water into one brick. Good night, nurse. Good night.
Man, I'm tell you what, I've won some beer bong competitions back in my day, but that's even fast for me. Bob, tell us, we have a couple presentations here. We want to make sure everybody gets them. So tell us how you'd like us to distribute these presentations for everybody.
Well, if you do it on YouTube, I imagine that you guys are more familiar with the distribution of these things than I am.
We can put a link. We can put a link to where they can download it in the description, I guess, would probably be the best thing, right?
We have a YouTube channel, WickRight.
There you go.
So we'll have them up there. So in a quick recap, buildings need to be vented. Buildings need to be sealed. We need to train our trades, our supply chain, and building science that this is a real thing. And if we don't do our assemblies where we separate the energy envelope from the structure, then we're just recreating this over and over again. Yeah. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Bob, I know we had a kind of a rough stop with the technology slide. Welcome to Market My World. Every day, every day. So I really appreciate you coming on to the show today and sharing all this stuff with us. I think the information is very relevant to what's happening because these aren't old buildings. They're buildings built within the last 20 years. Right. I think out of the 100 and some people that signed up for this show, they're all going to be running around telling a lot of people that they got water issues in their buildings. Now they know what to look for. Or they're going to be sticking test tubes to the side of them to see if it absorbs the water. But nonetheless,
I love that video.
Right. I love it.
So, well, when this video is free on YouTube, Dave or Bob, we're gonna tag you back, and then we'll put a copy of the place to go see more, like Dave mentioned, and we'll bring a copy of the first episode. And I would like to invite folks to join us again next Friday because it's BS Friday 55. 55 is symbolic because we're going to be talking about the need to deliver your message in 55 seconds. So Dave and I do it all the time. We go through short chats on how to prepare for things and how to get it to the virtual world, how to bring it to social media. Bob, we invite you back next week to join the conversation with our industry. And you always comment so well. It was great to have you on today.
Thank you.
Dave, Jennifer, and the Cooper family. I'm jealous. You get to hang out with our good friend Andrew, having s'mores tonight. And I wish everyone a blessed week. And I can't wait for all the shows next week.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
a
love
lot.
it.
It was an honor being here, guys. Really.
Hey, listen, it was an honor having you, Bob. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge with us. And for everybody else out there, we will see you tomorrow on Coffee with Dave.
with Dave Cooper Live.
Yep, and we're going to recap all this stuff, and I'll be prepared to tell everybody where to get this information from Bob tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern. Join us. Do not miss it. Thank you, everybody. I know there's some comments out there, but we are out of time. We will get to them. We appreciate everybody who tuned in today. Bob, Diane, you guys are rock stars. Keep doing what you do. We'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time on BS Rider. Bye now.